Alright guys, so we're going to start on quilting your bag. So before you start quilting, you're going to first turn your machine setting to a 2. You can leave everything else the same, but turn your machine setting to a 2. That way your needle will be centered in your presser foot. So when we start quilting, it's just like you're sewing, you're literally just going to be sewing lines down the fabric. So you're going to take your seam, you're going to line it up with the edge of the presser foot, and then put your needle down just like you always do, put your presser foot down, and we're just going to sew a straight seam all the way across your quilted piece. Alright, so we're going to start making the handles for our bag now. So before we do anything, we're going to press out our handle fabric. You should have already cut it. The dimensions are in the instructions. So we're going to fold over, as you can see. I've already folded this over and pressed it about 1/4 of an inch. I mean, precision isn't necessary, but definitely the closer it is, the better it's going to look. So after that, you're going to take your piece of fusible fleece and we're going to line it up into, we're going to kind of pull that back a little bit, and I'm going to get it as close into that corner there as I can. So the closer the better, because we're going to end up folding this over, and if you don't get it really tight in there, then you're going to end up folding over a little piece of your fleece, which is going to make your handles bulkier. So I have that in there. I'm going to press it down with the iron. I'm going to make sure that it fuses really well, especially on those edges. And then I'm just going to take this, the other side of it here, and I'm going to fold it over and match up those edges, and I'm going to press it again, and I want a really nice crease along that folded edge. Now we're going to start quilting, I guess you could say, the straps. So I've already sewn one seam down the side with the 2 edges. So for me, I just lined it up on here, excuse me, and I lined it up with this middle notch on your presser foot. Because we folded this over 1/4 of an inch, we're going to want this seam to be really narrow to make sure that we catch all of that fabric underneath there. So I did that one already. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. I'm going to line it up with that middle notch, and I'm going to sew a seam straight down. So back stitch at the beginning and end so that it's extra secure, because remember, this is going to be the handle, so there's going to be a lot of weight put on this piece of fabric, so we want our seams to be extra sturdy. Back stitch. And then we're just going to go down. That second seam. Now I'm going to start the actual quilting, and all it's going to be is just like we did on the tops, is we're going to do straight lines all the way down. So for this one, I'm going to set my machine back to a 2, and we're going to do the exact same thing that we did on the outside of our bag, is we're just going to line it up with the edge of the presser foot, and I'm going to sew a straight line all the way down. So when you're doing this, you may want to start on one side and then move to the other, and then possibly go down the center. It just kind of depends on the spacing of your handles that you're making.
Okay, you're going to press the interfacing, the fusible fleece, to the back side of one of the squares.
Alright, so after you've fused your fleece on, you're going to take your seam gauge and you're going to measure it, move the little piece to 1.5 inches. So you're going to put that at the corner, you're going to measure over and make a little mark with either a pencil or a marking pen at the edge of your seam gauge. So, and we're going to do that on both sides. So you're going to go out one side and down the other. So I'm going to make another mark right here. Now after I've made those 2 marks, I'm going to lay my seam gauge across them, and I'm going to draw a little line connecting them. We're going to end up trimming that corner, and you're going to do that with both pieces. So here would be the other side of my closure. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to measure down 1/2 inch on each corner, and then I'm going to trim those corners off, and then we're going to sew them together.
Okay.
Alright, So here's what you should end up with. After you're done, you're going to put them right sides together, and then we're going to sew around the edges, pivoting at all those corners, but we're gonna leave this long end open. Don't sew across there. Sewed a 1/4 of an inch seam with the right sides together. After that, we clipped our corners here, and we turned it to where the right sides were out. After that, you're gonna take you're just gonna sew along just as you did, and you're gonna top stitch a 1/4 of an inch all the way around the edge. So now we're ready to go ahead and make the buttonhole on our closure. So before you do anything, you wanna determine where it's at. So I kind of made, it's a little faint, but I made a little mark here so that I know where I want the end to be. But I'm not going to just go ahead and start. I'm always gonna do a practice so that you can make sure that you line it up. So you're gonna get your buttonhole foot, you're going to choose your button, and you're going to need a seam ripper before you start any of this. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm gonna take the other foot off of the machine, and I'm going to put my button inside of my button foot. So you'll notice here that there's a little holder, I guess you could call it, that moves in and out. So I'm going to push it out, and I'm going to put my button right in there, and I'm going to squeeze it tight until my button is secure in there. So it's not gonna go anywhere, it's not gonna move. So whenever you put your button in here, that tells the machine how big to make the buttonhole. So it's really important that you have it nice and tight on that button so that you get the correct size buttonhole. So the pin for the buttonhole foot is right here on this little white piece. You'll notice that it moves. So we're gonna go ahead. You may have to kind of lift your this up a little bit in order to be able to get it through there. And then we're just gonna click it on. All right, so the other important piece of using just the buttonhole foot in general is you'll notice that there's a little lever right here that moves up and down. So it's got arrows up and down, and it's got kind of a little zigzag rectangle on it. We're going to pull that down, and we want to make sure there's a little notch. You'll notice right here, we want to make sure that it's behind that notch. If it's in front of it, it's not going to make a buttonhole. You're just going to end up with a huge mess of thread on your fabric. So make sure it's behind there, or else you're not going to get a buttonhole. Okay. All right, so the other important piece about making buttonholes is before you even start sewing, you want to make sure that your bobbin is full. I personally have made buttonholes where I didn't check my bobbin beforehand. I got halfway through doing it, and then my bobbin ran out, and I had to start completely over again. So make sure your bobbin is full. After that, we're gonna go ahead and line up our fabric. So you should mark on your test fabric, you're gonna make kind of a little upside down T. So we're gonna put it underneath there, and you'll notice that there are several little green and red marks on here. So we're going to line it up with those little green and red marks. So I'm gonna kind of lower it, make sure I'm right there, pretty close. So I want these to line up with the edges of that T, and I want this center one here to line up with that line that I made. So it doesn't have to be spot on, but you definitely want it as close as possible to make sure that it's in the right spot. So we're going to turn your machine to stitch setting 34. So it's going to be, we're just making standard buttonholes, so we're gonna do 34. I just did mine, so I'm gonna reset it real quick, make sure that it's nice and good. So press your foot down, and then all you have to do, make sure that you hold this top string that's coming from your needle, hold that, and then all you have to do is press your presser foot, and your machine will do the rest. So no need to hold it, no need to do anything. Just hold on to that string, and your machine will do everything else, and it'll let you know when it's done making the buttonhole. So right there, it told me it was done, so I'm gonna raise my needle, raise my presser foot, slide it out, and there's my buttonhole. So after that, we're gonna go ahead and practice opening up the buttonhole, because obviously it's sewn together right now, you can't put a button through that. So I'm going to trim all my threads. And then we're going, this is where your seam ripper comes in handy. We're going to seam rip this buttonhole open. What is really helpful to make sure that you don't seam rip all the way through these edges here is to go ahead and grab a pin and stick that pin through that top edge there. So by sticking that there, that's going to make sure that when I seam rip here, so I'm just going to stick it in, slide it all the way up. That pin there keeps me from going through that top stitching so that I don't ruin the buttonhole that I just made. So now it's time to actually start assembling the bag. So for both the lining and the outside of the bag, we're going to be doing it the same way. We're going to put our fabric right sides together, which I've already done, and then you're going to go ahead and pin along this side, the bottom, and this side as well. On the outside of the bag, it's important again that your squares match up. This is the last time that it's going to be important that your squares match up. So just remember that the better they match up, the better your bag is going to look. So once you pin your bag together, you're going to do a 1/4 of an inch seam along this side, along the bottom, and along this edge as well. You're going to leave this one undone because that's going to be the top of our bag, and you're not going to sew in any of these little corners here because those are eventually going to be pulled apart, and we're going to sew those corners in a different way so that it looks more box-like at the bottom of the bag. The other difference is on your lining. Instead of sewing all the way across here, you're going to leave about a 5 or 6 inch gap, so maybe about what would be 2 of the squares. You're going to leave a hole there because we're eventually going to turn the bag through that hole, so definitely make sure that it's a decent size. Backstitch at the beginning and end of each seam as well. So you already sewed the edges of your bag, and now we're going to work on the corner. So instead of just going and pivoting around the corner, we're going to do something else that makes it a little bit more box-like. So what you're going to do is you're going to take these edges and you're going to pull them apart to where these middle seams match. So I have a seam here and I have a seam here, and I want to match those up. You're going to take it and you're going to sew another 1/4 of an inch here. That good? Mm-hmm. All right, so make sure that you match these seams up, and we're just going to sew a 1/4 of an inch seam along that edge. So really simple, it's a straight edge, but again, make sure that those seams match up. Whenever you're done, it's going to look more like this side, so you'll see here it's a little bit more box-like, it's got a lot more structure to it. So, and after that, we're going to be ready to go ahead and start putting the handles on. Alright, so now we're ready to go ahead and start putting our handles on. So to put our handles on, you're going to take the strip that you made, and we're going to take these ends. What we're going to do is we're going to flip them down. So you want the handle to be inside of like the bag part. You don't want it to be sticking up like this. You want it to be inside. So in this case, I have 5 rows running along here, so I'm going to take that middle row and I'm going to match it up with a seam of 2 blocks. So I'm going to match that up there. And then I'm just going to take a pin and I'm going to stick it straight through there. And I'm going to do the exact same thing with the other one. I'm going to find that middle row, find a seam, match them up, and stick a pin through it. So once you have those pinned on, you're going to go into your sewing machine and you're going to, again, just sew a 1/4 of an inch seam along here. With these, since your handles are what holds the weight of the bag, you're going to want to go back and forth over that at least probably 4 or 5 times. Just go down and then back stitch all the way across several times to make sure that those are really secure. Okay. All right, so we're gonna start putting all of the pieces together. We've already put our handles and our closure on, and we're gonna have the bag turned inside out. Once you have it turned inside out, we're going to put the lining inside of it. So I've already put 2 pins here, so we're going to match up these side seams. So I matched up the seams of the lining and of the outside of the bag, the quilted part. So, and our lining is going to go in and everything is going to go in right sides together. So I'm going to put a few pins along the top here, making sure that my handles are tucked down really well in there so that they don't get caught up while I'm sewing it. I'm going to pin this, and then I'm going to use the free arm on my machine, and I'm going to sew a 1/4 of an inch seam all the way around the bag.